It was a dark and stormy evening when Emily decided to visit Echo Ridge. She had heard stories about the place from her friends, but she never quite believed them. Echo Ridge was a lonely hill on the outskirts of town, a place where no one dared to go after sunset. The locals said that the ghost of a woman haunted the ridge, her cries echoing through the valley, warning anyone who ventured too close. Emily wasn't easily scared. She was curious and loved adventure. So, when her friends dared her to spend the night at Echo Ridge, she couldn't resist. They had all heard the stories about the ghost, but Emily thought they were just legends meant to frighten children. The storm was getting worse as Emily drove along the narrow road leading to the ridge. Lightning flashed across the sky, casting eerie shadows on the trees. The wind howled through the branches, and the rain pelted her windshield like 1,000 tiny hammers. But Emily pressed on, determined to face whatever awaited her. When she finally arrived, the air felt different, colder, thicker. She shivered as she stepped out of her car and looked up at the dark silhouette of Echo Ridge. The trees surrounding the hill swayed wildly in the storm, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Emily grabbed her flashlight and began to walk toward the foot of the hill. As she climbed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves made her jump. She tried to brush off her unease, telling herself it was just the wind and rain playing tricks on her. But when she reached the top of the ridge, something was different. The air was still. The storm seemed to have paused, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Emily stood there for a moment, looking around at the valley below. It was quiet, too quiet. No sounds of animals, no rustling of the wind, just the eerie silence of the hill. Suddenly, she heard a faint cry, distant but unmistakable. It was a woman's voice, filled with sadness and pain. Emily froze, her heart racing in her chest. The sound seemed to come from all around her, echoing through the trees and across the ridge. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. "Hello?" Emily called out, her voice shaking. There was no answer, just the echo of her own words. But then, the cry came again, louder this time, closer. It sent a chill down her spine. Emily turned around quickly, but saw nothing. Her flashlight beam swept across the darkness, but all she saw were trees and rocks. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. It was just the wind, she told herself, just her imagination. But as she turned to walk back down the hill, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure. A woman standing at the edge of the ridge. Her clothes were torn and tattered, her hair wild and flowing in the wind. But it was her face that made Emily's heart stop. The woman's eyes were empty, hollow, as if all the life had been drained from them. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly white, and her mouth was open in a silent scream. Emily's legs froze in fear. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The woman's gaze seemed to pierce through her, as if she were looking into Emily's very soul. The woman raised her arm, pointing directly at Emily. And then, in a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers, she spoke. "Leave this place, or you will never leave." The words echoed in Emily's mind, repeating over and over. Panic surged through her body. She turned and ran, stumbling down the hill as fast as she could, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of her footsteps seemed to echo in the silence, louder and louder, until it drowned out everything else. When she reached her car, Emily slammed the door shut and locked it. Her hands were shaking as she tried to start the engine. It sputtered, then roared to life. She hit the gas pedal, speeding away from Echo Ridge, not daring to look back. As Emily drove back into town, her heart was still pounding. The image of the woman's face haunted her thoughts. She couldn't understand what had just happened. Was it real? Had she imagined it? But deep down, she knew that what she saw on Echo Ridge wasn't a figment of her imagination. It was something far more terrifying. The next day, Emily decided to visit the local library to find out more about Echo Ridge and the ghost that supposedly haunted it. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important she had to learn. Inside the library, the old librarian, Mrs. Jenkins, gave her a strange look when Emily mentioned Echo Ridge. "Be careful, child," Mrs. Jenkins warned, her voice low and serious. "That hill has a dark history. Many years ago, a woman named Clara lived in a small cabin at the foot of Echo Ridge. She was a healer, helping the sick and injured, but she was also feared by many. People believed she had the power to curse others, to control their fate." Emily listened intently, her curiosity growing. One stormy night, Clara disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. Some say she was taken by the storm, while others believe she was driven mad by the voices she heard in the ridge. But one thing is certain. After she vanished, the people who lived near Echo Ridge began to hear her cries, and they say her ghost still haunts that hill, forever searching for something she can never find. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as Mrs. Jenkins finished her story. "Be careful, child," the librarian repeated. "Clara's ghost doesn't take kindly to trespassers." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The woman's face from Echo Ridge kept appearing in her dreams. She saw the empty eyes, the silent scream, the ghostly figure that had pointed at her, warning her to leave. And in her dreams, Clara's voice echoed, pleading for someone to help her, to break the curse that bound her to Echo Ridge. Emily didn't know what to do. She wanted to help, but how? What could she do for a ghost who had been lost for so long? She couldn't just ignore it, not after everything she had experienced. The next morning, Emily returned to Echo Ridge, this time determined to find out more. She climbed the hill again, this time not with fear, but with purpose. She would find Clara's story, and she would end the curse that had kept her trapped. At the top of the ridge, she saw the figure again, Clara, standing at the edge, waiting. This time, Emily wasn't afraid. She approached the ghost and spoke softly. "I'm here to help you, Clara. Tell me what I can do." The ghost's hollow eyes softened, and for the first time, the eerie silence was broken by a soft whisper. "Free me," Clara said, her voice barely audible in the wind. "End the curse. Help me find peace." Emily nodded, determined to do whatever it took to help the restless spirit. The next few days were a blur of research. Emily scoured old records, talked to locals, and pieced together the story of Clara. She learned that Clara had once been loved by the people, known for her kindness and wisdom. But after her disappearance, many had turned on her, accusing her of witchcraft, of using dark magic to control their fates. Emily couldn't understand how something so beautiful could turn so dark. She wondered if there had been some sort of misunderstanding, if Clara had truly been innocent all along. Emily couldn't help but think that the curse had been placed on the wrong person, someone who had only tried to help. The final piece of the puzzle came when Emily found Clara's journal, hidden deep in the town archives. The journal was filled with cryptic entries, each one more desperate than the last. Clara had been trying to break free from the voices, from the curse, but it seemed there was no escape. The journal ended abruptly, the last entry scrawled in a frantic hand. "The ridge will take me, but my soul will never rest." With this knowledge, Emily knew what she had to do. She returned to Echo Ridge, armed with a sense of purpose and the truth about Clara's past. When Emily reached the top of the ridge, she saw Clara's ghost waiting once more. This time, Clara's eyes held no fear, no anger. There was a sadness, but also a glimmer of hope. "I found the truth," Emily said softly. "You weren't meant to be cursed. You were trying to help." Clara's form seemed to shimmer, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered. "Help me break the curse." Emily nodded. She whispered a prayer and placed the journal on the ground at Clara's feet. The wind howled as the storm rolled in once more, but this time Emily wasn't afraid. She stood firm as Clara's ghost seemed to vanish, her form dissolving into the air like mist. The air around Emily grew lighter, and for the first time since she had arrived, the ridge felt peaceful. The storm passed, and the sky cleared. Emily knew that Clara had finally found the peace she had been searching for, and the curse had been broken. As Emily left Echo Ridge that night, she looked back at the hill one last time. The ghost was gone, but the memories of her encounter would stay with Emily forever.